Hello again, family, and thanks for journeying with me on another Sunday as we follow Jesus, as Jesus journeys his way to Jerusalem. So we have a short reading today from Luke 17, verse 11 through 21. So as it reads, as he continued his journey to Jerusalem, he traveled through Samaria and Galilee. As he was entering a village, 10 lepers met him. They stood at a distance from him and raised their voice, saying, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. And when he saw them, he said, Go, show yourselves to the priests. And as they were going, they were cleansed. And one of them, realizing he had been healed, returned, glorifying God in a loud voice, and he fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus said in reply, 10 were cleansed, were they not? Where are the other 9? Has none but this foreigner returned to give thanks to God? Then he said to him, Stand up and go. Your faith has saved you. The word of the Lord. So again, short but powerful reading as they all are. So as I said in the beginning, Jesus is journeying to Jerusalem. He's on his way. And here it says that he was traveling through Samaria and Galilee. So this is important to know because the one that comes back after he's healed is a Samaritan. So Jesus is either in Samaria or very close to Samaria. And we need to know who the Samaritans were. So around 722 BC in the Assyrian exile, the Assyrians came in and decimated the Jewish people, the Israelites, and the Jews from that point on were kind of split up into the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes. And the 10 northern tribes, they kind of commingled with the Assyrians. They were seen by traditional Jews in the south as half-breeds, as not fully Jewish people. They had their own temple. There was a lot of friction between the Jews and the Samaritans. And we see this throughout Scripture. And one thing that Jesus came to do is to unite all people through him, but especially the Samaritans, since they were kind of like looked at as half-breed Jews, right? So that's really important to understand the context, the historical context of Jews and Samaritans. So here it says, Jesus is entering into a town and 10 lepers meet him. So 10 lepers. Leprosy is a skin disease, still is. It's deadly and it's contagious. And that was well known back then. In the book of Leviticus, in the Old Testament scriptures, it says that the lepers must dwell outside the camp. So it makes sense here because it says Jesus was entering a village, and then these 10 lepers, it says they stood at a distance and they raised their voice. Now, in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, as prescribed in the book of Leviticus, the lepers were to yell out, unclean, unclean, every time someone got near them. And that was to prevent this disease from spreading because it was so contagious, it was highly contagious. So to let everyone know that you have this deadly contagious disease, you had to yell, unclean, unclean. So they're keeping their distance from Jesus. They're outside the town as Jesus is entering into this village. And instead of yelling, unclean, unclean, they say, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Have mercy on us. What an act of humility by these lepers, right? They've been dealt a tough hand, very tough hand. And they're acknowledging who Jesus is and who they are in need of mercy, in need of pity from the Lord. So it says, Jesus turns to them, sees them, and he says, go show yourselves to the priests. And they were probably expecting to be healed, right then and there, because surely they had heard stories. In order to call Jesus Master and to approach him in this way, they would have heard stories on who this Jesus was and these great miracles that he was doing. But Jesus usually laid his hands on somebody for healing. You know, in some circumstances, he even spit in the dirt and mixed saliva in the dirt and made mud and made people see that way. So Jesus is usually kind of doing something and offer a healing right then and there. But in this circumstance, he does something very different. He says, go show yourselves to the priests. Now, it's important to understand that a priest's duty in Jewish historical Judaism was to offer the sacrifice, but a priest also was to inspect lepers for a possible reinstatement back into the community. Because you see, lepers, they had to dwell outside. They couldn't see their friends, their family. They were completely isolated. Imagine being a leper and not being allowed to go into the temple, not being allowed to go see your friends and family, right? And worst of all, it was the predominant thought was that sin, either yours or your family, caused unfortune. So to have leprosy was one of the most unfortunate things you ever could have had in biblical times 2,000 years ago. So the shame that these people must have carried around must have been just overwhelming downtroddenness and shame and guilt and stuff like that. So they turn to Jesus, and Jesus says, go show yourselves to the priest. So it says, as they were going, they were cleansed. Wow. As they were going, they were cleansed. They're on their way. It didn't make any sense to go show themselves to the priest unless they were healed, right? But it's this radical obedience. So today's scripture is really on faith. They believed that Jesus could do this. They had faith in him. They had trust in him, as we talked a lot about faith and trust last week. And now it's obedience. So it's faith in Jesus and also obedience to him that brought about their healing. And what a great lesson that we can take from this. Two things so important in the Christian walk is faith and obedience, right? Fully trusting in God and fully obeying everything that he says. So as they go, as they trust, as they have faith, as they are obedient to the word of Jesus, they're on their way, and they realize on their way, as they're being faithful, we're healed, we're cleansed. So one of them returns to give thanks to God because, again, think how much joy there must have been. Who knows how long they had to dwell outside the camp and just been in this terrible state, not only dealing with the disease, but the state of isolation and guilt and shame, like we already mentioned. So they must have been so in a hurry to get to the priest so the priest could reinstate them, so they could go back and be with their friends and their family and worship in the temple and do all these things. But one returned to give thanks, and it was a Samaritan. And I think that kind of tends to lend itself that the others were probably Jews. So it's this one foreigner, this one Samaritan that returns to give thanks. He put his joy aside for a minute. He took time out of his day to return to the one that healed him, return to the one that saved him, right? So the first question I think that begs of us is, do we recognize that everything is a gift from God? Everything we have is a gift from God. And how often do we sit down and take time out of our day to thank God for all the blessings we have? Right? Sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and pray and light a candle and just thank God for the cup of hot tea I'm drinking and the couch I get to sit on and where I get to live, and that I have a roof and I got a good night's sleep and I have a job to go to, and all those things that we tend, and it's so easy to take for granted, is really a gift from God that we can give thanks to him and take time out. We really need to do that. Secondly, in the obedience category, are we obedient to him? Even when it doesn't make sense, right? Sometimes it might make more sense to sin and to not choose God than it does to actually be obedient. And we need to be obedient, and that's something we need to pray for the grace to, because it doesn't come natural, for me anyway. Being obedient to God doesn't come supernatural. And when I was reflecting on this reading, three of my favorite verses in Scripture that kind of fit together. They fit with this reading, so I thought I'd share those. And first one in Matthew 10:29, Jesus essentially says that not even a sparrow falls from the sky apart from the Father's care, right? So God knows about everything. He understands everything that's going on in everyone's life. And Jesus says, not a sparrow falls from the sky apart from the Father's care. right? And he goes on to say how we need to trust God because God knows and cares about everything in our life, right? And St. Paul in Romans 8, verse 28 writes that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So God causes all things to work together for good. So God knows about all things. He cares about all things. He causes all things to work together for good. And therefore, Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 16 through 17, rejoice always, pray unceasingly, and in all circumstances give thanks. And that's what I want to focus on right now is this giving thanks in all circumstances. Because as much blessing as we have in our life to give thanks for, a lot of times it's easy to get caught up in the negative. It's easy to get caught up in what's going wrong and what I wish was different. And God, why did you allow this and stuff like that? But if we truly trust God, if we truly have faith, and we truly believe that he cares about us as his children, if we truly believe that he is all powerful and almighty and can work all things together for good, then we can rejoice always and pray and give thanks in all circumstances, trusting that all things are working together. So whatever's going on in our lives that we wish didn't happen, we can say, God, I don't know why you're allowing this, but I trust in you. I trust that you're working something good out of it. And therefore, I'm going to give you thanks for this thing that I wish wasn't happening, out of faith and obedience and trust in you. Because the fact of the matter is, brothers and sisters, we're all these lepers. Through sin, we're all lepers. But through baptism, through the washing of the water, through the cleansing waters of baptism, through faith in Jesus, he has healed us. He has saved us. Saved and healed in the Greek, in the New Testament was written in, it's the same word. So faith and healed are the same word. So through the sacrifice of Jesus, through Jesus' obedience to the Father, going to the cross, he has healed us. He has saved us from our sin. So let us do what this leper did, the Samaritan leper. Let us return to Jesus. Let us fall at his feet, glorifying God and giving thanks for all he has done for us. May God bless you this week. Please pray for me as I pray for you. And I look forward to next Sunday.